Welcome to today's Economy Committee meeting, where we'll be discussing barriers to work for asylum seekers and refugees. Please can I ask everyone to switch off your electronic devices to silent mode and to avoid any disruptions this morning. But if you are on social media, please use the hashtag #AssemblyEconomy. Now, can I ask the clerk, Jack Booth, if there are any apologies that have been received?
Thank you, Chair. We've got no apologies for absence.
Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? Okay. Can we confirm the minutes of the Economy Committee meeting held on the 30th November 2022 to be signed to me as a correct record?
Confirmed.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the completed and ongoing actions arising from previous meetings? Thank you. Can I ask the committee note the response from the Mayor to the committee's financial exclusion letter? Thank you. And can I ask the committee to note the action taken by me as chair under delegated authority following consultation with party group lead members, namely to agree the committee's letters to the Mayor regarding London's street and covered markets? Brilliant, thank you. We're now going to move on to our main item of business, the discussion with invited guests on barriers to work for asylum seekers and refugees. I'd like to welcome our first panel of guests, Matthew Powell, CEO from Breaking Barriers. Welcome. Dr. Tara Povey from the Policy and Research Manager, who's a Policy and Research Manager from Refugee Action. Thank you. And we are going to be joined virtually by Siân, Summers-Rees, Chief Officer from the City of Sanctuary. Can we just say a quick hello to you? Can you hear us okay?
I can indeed.
Brilliant.
Good morning.
Morning. And we have Niloha Rangel, who is from the City of Sanctuary Ambassador and a refugee and a doctor. Thank you so much. We are going to be starting off our first questions from myself, and it's to Tara, and it's just going to be getting a legal context of asylum seekers and their permission to work. What is the permission to work policy, and what are the main reasons for the restrictions on asylum seekers working in the United Kingdom?
Thanks very much. So currently people seeking asylum in the UK are only able to apply for the right to work after they've been waiting for a decision on their asylum claim for over a year. That policy has been in place since 2002. Up to 2002, people seeking asylum could apply for permission to work if they had been waiting for 6 months or more for an initial decision on their asylum claim. In July 2002, that provision was withdrawn except in exceptional cases, but no policy was developed to explain what those cases might be. At the time that the policy was actually withdrawn, the rationale for it was given by that government that it was actually to do with faster decision-making processes that would take place in the asylum system, which would mean that previous policy where people could apply for work after 6 months would become irrelevant. But of course, as we know, that is unfortunately no longer the case. And in fact, 67% of applicants this year have waited for 6 months or more for an initial decision on their asylum claim. And that waiting period is growing year on year, and it's affecting larger numbers of people. One of the things that we've found is that, in fact, many people are waiting longer than even 12 months to be able to apply for permission to work. So if you don't receive a decision, or if you receive a negative decision on your asylum claim and you appeal, you cannot work during the appeals process, which can take up to a year. And once the appeals process has been exhausted, asylum seekers who want to make further submissions or a fresh claim have to wait another 12 months before they can apply for permission to work. So in fact, you have cases of people who wait years for a final decision on their asylum claim. And in fact, this is important because this year, for example, 52% of appeals cases were upheld. Of the people who made appeals. So many people are in fact waiting years for a final decision on their asylum claim, and during that period they can't work. We have one case study, for example, of a woman from Somalia who studied English and accounting. She had a job in government. She was forced to leave her country of origin after receiving death threats from Al-Shabaab. She fled to the UK, and whereupon she waited 4 years for permission to work during that period. Even when people do get the permission to work, they're very rarely able to work in practice because their employment is restricted to the very narrow list of highly skilled professions included on the shortage occupation list. And some examples of these are, for example, classical ballet dancer or geophysicist. There have been recent changes to the shortage occupation list to include social care workers. But in fact, the use of the shortage occupation list as a whole in the way that it's applied to restrict work for people seeking asylum is quite problematic. And in fact, it was referred to by the Migration Advisory Committee in their 2021 report as being not particularly coherent in the way that it's applied to asylum seekers, because of course these are people who are in a very different position. They're people who are fleeing war and persecution, and they're trying to rebuild their lives in a new country. The other thing just to say about the policy is it really disproportionately impacts on a specific group of people. And that group of people are adult dependents of people who claim asylum, who are never allowed to work. And in fact, if we look at the Home Office's figures on who the adult dependents of asylum seekers are, 82% of them this year are women. So adult dependents, this very large majority of whom are women, are never allowed to work, even if the main applicant, the male household member, gains status. They are only allowed to gain permission to work if they then put in a separate claim for asylum. So this is a policy that really also disproportionately impacts a group of women who are then becoming economically dependent on their male household members and are not able to share their skills and experience in society.
Okay, you mentioned some figures there from the Home Office. Now, the government doesn't actually collect data on the number of asylum seekers in employment. Do you have any sense of how many asylum seekers are in employment in London or in the UK, and do you know what work they are doing? If you just put the mic on by pressing the button, then that's it.
Sorry about that. So you're right, the government doesn't collect that data. We know, for example, that there are 9,273 asylum applicants on Section 95 support in London. We don't know how many of those are working, but we do have survey results on research that we have carried out ourselves. In August and September 2018, the Lift the Ban Coalition carried out a survey with 246 people with direct experience of the asylum process. 94% of respondents said that they would like to work if given permission to do so. In terms of their skills and experience, we asked about the kind of skills and education levels that they had, the kind of work that they would like to do. 74% of respondents told us that they had secondary level education or higher. 37% held undergraduate or postgraduate degrees. That falls just short of the percentage of the total UK population classed as graduates, which is 42%. Nearly 2/3, 65%, were working before they came to the UK. And that's a really significant statistics because, again, these are often people who are fleeing countries where there is, there is war, there is ongoing conflict, there is persecution that they may be facing on the basis of of who they are, of being a member of a particular social group, and yet still these are people who have achieved a great deal in terms of in their professional lives, and they have obviously a lot of skills and experience to offer. And we found really that of the 36 people we surveyed who had applied for permission to work after finally gaining that permission after 12 months, only 8 of them were granted permission and only 2 of them were able to find jobs in reality. So it just demonstrates how difficult it is. And, you know, we don't have the figures for those numbers in London or in the UK. Of course, it would be great if the Home Office did collect that data, but we can extrapolate from some of the research that we have done, which shows that a huge majority of asylum seekers want to work, they want to contribute to society, and they want to overcome the barriers that are currently, unfortunately, being put in their way.
Thank you so much. We're going to be moving on to Assemblymember Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Morning to our guests. This is a question for all 3 of you, so please do feel like you can all make a comment. What are the main arguments for and against relaxing the permission to work policy? Do you want to start, Matthew, or why don't you start?
I'm happy to speak to that. We support people once they've got the right to work, so we're supporting people that have got a status, refugee status or equivalent. I think that organisations like ourselves and interventions that fund refugee employment provision would need to be dramatically reduced if asylum seekers were given the right to work. Our intervention is largely in response. There are lots of barriers that refugees face, but one of the biggest barriers they face is the gap created on the CV created by the asylum process. Of the refugees that we support, over half wait over a year and about 7% wait over 10 years. And speaking to the employers we speak, so we specialise in working with businesses who actively want to hire refugees, and they share with us their normal recruitment processes, and what they'll say is we're increasingly using tech to screen CVs, and the moment we see a gap on a CV of 6 months or more, it's discarded immediately. So we work with them to create job opportunities and get that first piece of UK work experience that negates that gap. But if that gap didn't exist, interventions like ourselves probably in large part wouldn't need to exist.
Okay. Dr. Povey?
Just in terms of when we're talking about arguments for and against the policy, I think one of the really important things to note is that there has been significant support for change across the political spectrum in terms of the lifting the ban on the right to work for asylum seekers. There have been many different governments that have called for reform. In 2018, the then Immigration Minister, Caroline Noakes, noted that there is much merit in the arguments for reform. There have been many calls for a review from different party positions. And I think it's also important to note that this support for lifting the ban is really strong among people whose views on migration otherwise do vary quite widely. And again, research that we've conducted and polling demonstrates that even when people are split on topics such as Brexit, 63% of Leave voters voted in favour of lifting the ban on asylum seekers working, and 78% of Remain voters. But regardless of that, one of the main arguments that's put most commonly against lifting the ban is the concept of the pull factor. The government has used time and time again this argument that granting the right to work for asylum seekers would be a pull factor and would attract people to apply for asylum in the UK rather than elsewhere. And I think one of the, of course, important things to note about this is that the government has not produced any evidence to actually demonstrate that there is a pull factor. And in fact, even the internal Home Office research on what attracts people to different countries and whether people have a choice in where they apply for asylum at all demonstrates that there is absolutely no evidence that access to the labour market is a pull factor for people seeking asylum at all. In fact, it demonstrates that most people seeking asylum do not have a choice about where they end up, where they do end up claiming asylum. And to the extent that they do have a choice, it's informed much more by factors such as historical links between countries, the presence of family members. You know, when you are fleeing persecution, when you're trying to get to safety, if you have family members in a particular country, obviously you will try to, get to that country. And being able to speak the English language. And for those particularly fleeing persecution on the basis of being a member of a particular social group, obviously the reputation of the UK as being a tolerant society that has respect for people of different identities and is a democratic society is also important as well. So again, the Migration Advisory Committee, the committee that advises the government on migration, has urged the Home Office to present any evidence, robust evidence, that it has that the right to work could function as a pull factor, and we have yet to see that evidence. Our own survey results, again, with people seeking asylum, that we carried out, in those survey results, 72% told us that they had no knowledge of the labour market system or various different complex support asylum processes or support systems in the UK.
Is there a difference between people as a pull factor? Is there a difference between people seeking asylum and people are economic migrants? Is there a difference in the impact of access to the labour market? Is there any figures that exist around that?
Well, one of the arguments that has been put is that granting people the right to work will, increase economic migrants or people who are coming as economic migrants but are in fact asylum seekers. But that's a very contradictory argument because, as you can imagine, people who are fleeing persecution and come and make an asylum claim and then, present themselves and their desire to work in the formal economy to get official permission to work from the Home Office are unlikely to be people who are going to be, trying to enter the economy in informal ways because they are identifying themselves and their desire to work to the Home Office. There is really no connection that has been proven there between people who are economic migrants who come to the UK for various reasons and asylum seekers, people who come to the UK because they are fleeing persecution and conflict.
So are you... I'm just asking specifically if someone is an economic migrant, in their mind, does access to the employment market, is that a pull factor for them? I don't want to mix that with people who seek asylum because for me they're two very different groups of people. So are you saying that it's roughly the same, maybe a little bit more, a little less? What's the effect there, or we simply don't know?
Of course, people who are migrating to the UK to take up occupations, for example, as skilled migrants, are subject to the shortage occupations list, and it's a very different process for them.
Okay,
Yeah.
I see. Thank you. I just want to almost ask you a question about Lift the Ban. In your report, Lift the Ban, you seem to want to go back to the rules that the Labour government put in 2002, 6 months. But if you're called Lift the Ban, why not just go to zero? Why only 6 months? Why not zero?
I think it's obviously we want people to gain the right to work and gain access to education and to be integrated into society as soon as possible. But also, we recognise that there has to be a process and that there is currently people, moving through the asylum system. I would say that we think that 6 months is enough time to wait to gain permission to work. And so granting people permission to work after 6 months after the as the policy was prior to 2002 is what we would recommend, and that would bring the UK into line with other countries as well. Majority of countries in the EU and internationally, countries like Canada and Australia, you see a range of different time periods, but largely between 0, as in the case of Australia, and 6 months, as in the case of some European countries and the US.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I kind of body swerved there because I just read the title of your report. Just the last thing, what would you say to people who then say access to the job market, access to our public services director is an argument against relaxing these rules? What would be the response to that?
So, in what way? Sorry.
So my initial question: what are the arguments for and against relaxing provision to work policies? What would you say to people who would cite a sort of larger map? They talk about access to public services, access to work, transport, housing, because for many ordinary people, these things are one and the same. What would be the response to that?
Well, I mean, because asylum seekers don't have the right to work, and as we've talked about, they don't have the right to work sometimes for many years. In fact, what happens in the majority of cases where asylum seekers cannot support themselves and would become destitute is that they are reliant on asylum support that is paid to them by the Home Office. And as we know, the costs of the asylum system are, to the public person is now rising, every day to quite exponential levels. So one of the things that lifting the ban would do is that it would lift that burden of the government funding high levels of asylum support, and it would enable people to become economically independent. It would mean that they are not relying on very, very low levels of asylum support, which are being paid at the moment. So at the moment, people who are seeking asylum are really dependent on destitution levels of asylum support of £40.85 a week, or £8 if you are living in a hotel. That has been changed by a recent High Court judgment in December that actually found that the levels of asylum support were so low to be unlawful, and mandated that those levels should be raised immediately to £45 a week and £9.10 in hotels. But that is still really destitution level. So, that is harming integration, that is harming people's ability to really feel that they are a part of society. It's a cost, obviously, to the UK taxpayer, and most importantly, for people who are going through the asylum system, it's contributing to their isolation. It's contributing to the mental and physical effects of living in destitution and living in on very low subsistence.
Thank you. And my final question is: would we be running the risk of forming an underclass? Would asylum seekers who did have the right to work, would we run the risk of them being exploited if there was a large group of them? What proportion of asylum seekers who do work receive more than the minimum wage, or even the minimum wage? Because one of the arguments, which I think it's quite humanitarian, is that we wouldn't want a big group of migrants who people are then able to basically offer them any work, a very invaluable work, because they now have the right to work. Is there a worry, a risk of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very important point. So the first thing to say on that is, obviously, currently the ban on people working who are seeking asylum makes them much more vulnerable to labour exploitation, and of course modern slavery as well. And that's one of the reasons why lifting the ban is so important, especially for the groups that are disproportionately impacted, like women. It's one of the reasons why we also, I think, are very clear that in terms of lift the ban, that we want people to have permission to work and their adult dependents unconstrained by the shortage occupation list, is that the shortage occupation list is also unhelpful in this regard because it's restricting the amount of different occupations that people can have, and therefore maybe forcing people to go into areas of work where there may be labour exploitation as well. But in terms of when people do gain the right to work, it's very important that they are supported, and it's very important that policies are put in place so that that process is not punitive. And of course, that is possible to do once an official right to work policy is actually enacted. At the moment, you know, the degree of labour exploitation and the vulnerability of people is really being caused by people not having the right to work.
Okay, this is fascinating. We could go on, but the chair needs control.
Yeah, thank you. Assembly Member Harani, if you can wrap up this particular section, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And I think actually I'll start off where Sean finished on an issue that was raised, and maybe direct my questions at Niloha. Just on the impact of the change in September 2010 under the coalition government to restrict people seeking asylum to only being able to work on jobs on the shortage occupation list. What has the impact of this been on people?
Thank you for inviting me today. Well, the impact she has mentioned, and I know of some cases of my colleagues that the government is trying to fight against modern slavery, but really, they are creating this problem because some of my friends are working just for £5 an hour, £3 an hour, because it's not enough the government allowance. And this is creating another problem, and because they are bound to work, even if their asylum claim has already gone through 1 year, because they can't fit into the occupational list. So this is not fair because you can take any job. But I wouldn't say, and also they can integrate into society, they can heal their wounds, the post-traumatic disorder, depression, all the anxiety, all the mental health problems that asylum seekers and refugees have. And this is a problem, but not only this, it's just that you probably find a job, but it doesn't fit into your skills, because let me tell you one case. I have a friend, she's a teacher, and she hasn't been able to shadow a teacher. Or in my case, I am a doctor with 2 master's degrees. I haven't been able to shadow a doctor. Well, and it's I can find a job, at the Universal Credit. At the job center, they say you can go and clean toilets. You can. I said no. I am not going to do that. I have 2 master's degrees. I'm not going to waste my skills cleaning toilets. I am not undermining people who do that kind of jobs, but why should I do that? If I got skills, I can contribute with the NHS, who's got a huge shortage of doctors, and I shouldn't be doing a job that is not my job. So they are creating this kind of problem due to the occupational list. So what have I done? I've been developing a humanitarian career. I've been volunteering with the British Red Cross, City of Sanctuary, Doctors of the World, doing research, doing other things that, they are not my real skills. I have developed skills, speaking skills, listening skills. Yes, I have improved my English. I have built up my networks, but and also, I can say that I've been nominated for a humanitarian award because I've been doing this, and I won a lot of awards, but I'm happy doing this. But I really would love to work in what I've studied for, as a doctor. So, I pushed an organization, and finally I got a placement at the Cardiff Children's Hospital. And you can't imagine how rewarding this was, because once you got the opportunity to have a training or an internship or a placement in a hospital, in my case, well, you start learning the language, the technical language, and then, oh yeah, I know this. I'm familiar with they are talking, you know, and even they ask for my opinion. So one of the things is that you feel embraced, you feel value, you feel that you are improving and you are on your way, on the pathway of developing your career. But because they make it so difficult, and I have hundreds of cases that I could mention of people who would love to be shadowing or volunteering in any organization, but we are not allowed. Probably language barriers, of course. They ask you to be very fluent in English. That's a huge barrier. That's fine. But if you are not exposed, if you are not immersed in this kind of placements or internship or whatever you call them, you wouldn't hear the language, the technical language, and there's also a jargon. And when you apply for a job, the interview can be very hard, because it's a special jargon, a special technique like the STAR method that we are not used to, and you have to sell yourself. We are not used to this, you know. In our countries, we just give them our CVs, and they see our qualifications, our trainings, our master's degrees, our skills, but you don't have to sell yourself. And then you are asked about data protection, policies of the trust. You can Google, okay, but you don't have an idea of that sort of things. So that is part of the language barrier, I would say, that makes it very difficult to find a job. And also, we have a lack of familiarity of the UK system, so we don't know how this works. And also, one of the main problems is that our qualifications are not taken into account, and some of us have huge skills, and we could be used. So let me give you an example. During the COVID pandemic, I applied for a job to be immunizing people. I said, no, you are overqualified. We would rather train somebody else, just left high school, instead of taking you on board. I said, why not? I've been doing this all my life. You know, because I'm a pediatrician, that's what we do in my country. They said, no, we would rather train somebody else. You are overqualified. So I think I would fit perfectly in this job, but I wasn't given the opportunity. So they should take us our qualifications. And if you do not have a qualifications, people have skills. So in some countries, let me give you an example. In Canada, for example, there is like an app, and they ask you what skills you've got, and then they direct you to the services that could help you, where to apply, where to volunteer. So because we have so during this time, while we are doing this kind of volunteering, our qualifications get defunct, and there is a gap in our CV, and then when you apply for a role, you say, well, you haven't worked for a while. But it's not our fault. This is because of the lengthy process of the UK asylum system. It will take months. It can take ages, like years. So we are not given the opportunity to enroll ourselves in trainings. I mean, like readiness to work. Once you get permission to work, you can be ready to work. So I should say that it is a huge and massive barrier that we have. And I think we should work on this. And also, you are not shown the services you can apply, you have no information. I can give you an example. When I arrived here, nobody told me what to do. So I waited, and somebody told me you can ask the Welsh minister. So I just emailed the Welsh minister. I said, I'm a doctor. What can I do? How can I train myself? After 7 months, he told me, okay, you can attend to what is called the WARD program, that is Welsh Asylum Seekers and Refugee Doctors. They help you to qualify, they give you lessons to pass the exams, but you don't know, it's just word of mouth. So we should be shown the services that we could apply. We should give an opportunities to train ourselves and to be ready to work.
No, thank you. So I think it's been fascinating just to hear from someone who's actually gone through the system and the processes and the barriers that you face. I'm just going to turn online to Siân and just ask about the impact. So what do you feel the impact of relaxing the permission to work policy would have on people seeking asylum in London?
So from a city of sanctuary perspective, where our vision is of making London a welcoming place of safety for people seeking sanctuary, I think the impact in terms of fostering social contact and that building friendships and understanding, which is so important for integration, but also, you know, we just hear this really negative rhetoric in the media and unfortunately from the current government. So I think being able to have an opportunity to work means that you meet people and you're able to counter that negative narrative, and you'll be able to build those relationships and friendships, so that you know, there is that understanding of why people are here, and the dehumanizing language that unfortunately we're currently hearing. You know, people will meet people coming fleeing persecution and understand why they are here and want to support them, and understand that you know, that people have more in common than they have in terms of differences. So it's so important in terms of the social aspect, but also, you know, we've heard the economic arguments. We've also heard, we've already sort of talked about the impact of people not working for lengthy periods of time, but impact on people's mental health and well-being. So it's so vitally important that people are given opportunities to access education, but also employment, and to be able to, you know, realise their potential and also contribute to society.
Thank you. No, that's really helpful. I think you highlighted one of the issues. I think it's a tough place. One of the arguments that you see in the press often is around people exploiting the system, but actually, do people know that actually people are not allowed to work who are going through the system and benefit and contribute to society, and the barriers that are involved in that? Just going to invite any of the panellists just to see if they want to add anything on. We've heard about the social impact, but more on the economic impact of relaxation. And just finally ask if anyone has anything else to add on that. Matthew?
Well, I can talk on behalf of the businesses that we work with. A lot of the businesses we work with support us or want to hire refugees because they think it's the right thing to do. But in large part, it's driven by business need. They're suffering acute skill shortages, and they view refugees as a potential solution to that. And I think the public attention post-Afghanistan evacuation and with the Ukraine conflict has brought this to people's attention more, and more businesses are thinking, well, actually, this is a client group that has a huge amount of skills, a willingness to work, and a client group that we would really like to hire. But that is relying on us developing bespoke relationships with them and asking them to adapt their entire recruitment processes to account for the current situation that these individuals are in. To my point earlier, if there's these massive gaps on the CV that wouldn't go through your traditional recruitment processes, you're asking, if we're looking at scaling a solution to support refugees into jobs, you're relying on individual relationships with businesses brokered by organisations like ours. I don't think that's scalable. So I think if we can make it easier for businesses to hire refugees, I think allowing them to support or hire people that are asylum seekers would enable them to slot into their existing recruitment processes, which would actually make it cheaper in terms of government funding for services like ours, but also much easier for businesses to fill some of the skill shortages they're facing at the moment.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to be moving on to our next section, which is on barriers to employment for refugees, and we are aiming to finish this section at 11:30 for the next panel. So we're going to move on to Assembly Member Sheikh next.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to the panel. Thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, I mean, that was obviously a very difficult first section to digest, hearing about the realities of what it's like to be a person seeking asylum in the UK. I've done a lot of work with Migrant Voice, and they recently organised a roundtable at the end of last year, and they had a lot of organisations sort of come, but also people in various migration status sort of speaking about their experience, and it's a system that I can see why the courts intervened in, to say the least. So obviously, as the Chair said, this is a sort of section looking more about the barriers to employment for refugees, so once they're sort of entering the employment market. And I wanted to just start off with what are the main barriers for refugees accessing employment in the UK. So that's open to the whole panel. I don't know if anyone wants to kick off.
Well, just thank you. Well, I can summarize barriers, as I said. Well, language barriers. Yeah, that's the first one. And not only, I mean, the knowledge of English, as I said, the jargon, the technical language, because when you apply for a role, even the job description can be very difficult to understand if you don't know a technical language, and that specific language that is written on the job application and the person specification. And also there is a lack of specialist service, and there is not knowledge of services, and because of the length of the waiting of the asylum system, as I said, our qualifications just get out of date. And some of our colleagues, it has been easier to restart the same career in the UK, you know, doctors studying medicine again, or teachers. It's not fair, you know, that if you got a diploma or, you know, in a particular profession or skill, that you have to restart it again, do your GCSEs. It's not fair. It will take you ages. So sometimes it's easier to restart your own career. And another barrier would be the financial support, because whilst you are attending a course, or some mothers that don't have money for childcare, so that's a really huge barrier. The financial impact on refugees, and believe it or not, it's very common amongst us. People have to look after their children, or they can't attend to courses. And yes, it's the lack of familiarity of the employment system. And one of the things that we found in the research that we have done is that some of the refugees experience discrimination at the workplace. It's a very common situation, well, because, well, you got a different background, a different religion, probably a different sexual orientation, and that becomes a really a huge barrier. It shouldn't be like that. It should be embrace diversity, embrace cultures, embrace other languages. And we know the UK is a multicultural society, so they have to really be more inclusive of people. And another thing that really comes up very frequently is that they always ask you, what's your experience working in the UK? You haven't been able to work, so how come you can have experience? So they always ask you, have you ever worked in the UK? We haven't. So give us the opportunity for training and to demonstrate that we can be very useful and we can apply our skills. Because at the end of the day, one of the advantages of hiring refugees for any job, well, I know it could be a probationary period, but we tend, and it's been really researched, we retained our jobs. because we have a commitment to work, we need to work, and because we are very resilient because of the journey of our asylum journey, all the things we have gone through. So we are very resilient. We can stick to that job and share our skills from our countries, so we can contribute to any service in the UK, because we have skills and we have studies from other countries, and we have experience, we have passion, motivation. We have to show our readiness to work, and so that would be an advantage. I mean, speaking of the barriers, it would be an advantage of hiring refugees, because we are very committed. We really want to work, and we need to work, and also we want to integrate. So
thank you. No, that was really helpful. I appreciate that. So had you finished?
Yeah, I would just say it would give us a purpose. And when you are given a purpose, it gives you a significance for living.
Thank you for that. Tara, I don't know if you wanted to add. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, as Niloha was saying, I mean, many times we think of the barriers to for employment for refugees as being, we think of them in terms that are internal, so people not having knowledge of the system or having or language. But I think it's really important to consider the institutional and structural barriers as well. And some of those obviously are a direct result of, as Matt was saying, of the fact that people are living for long periods on very low levels of asylum support, often in isolation, often not able to integrate into communities, often not able to access ESOL provision. And that is what is, and of course not being able to work, and that is really what is the main barrier. But apart from that, we also know that there is a lack of specific initiatives for refugee employment. There is as Niloha was arguing, a limited access to mainstream opportunities to develop skills, knowledge, and gain qualifications. Employers often are confused about the rules surrounding refugees working. Here again, the use of the shortage occupation list is really unhelpful because, as I argued before, it was never designed to be used to restrict asylum seekers or refugees from working, and the confusion around, you know, what are the rules in terms of sponsorship licenses for people seeking asylum, for refugees, for people who gain status. I think all of those are contributing to employers sometimes not being confident about hiring refugees. There is prohibited costs of proving your qualifications. I think, again, as Niloha was saying, and there is difficulties around recognition of past experience and achievements. Often people come here with qualifications, they come here with skills, but then instead of there being, for example, conversion courses for people who work in social care, for example, we found in the research that Lift the Ban did on the occupations that people had, that 45% of them would have been classed as critical care workers. 1 in 7 was working in health and social care before they came to the UK. But those people are being put in a position where they have to prove their qualifications or where they have to go through a training program again from scratch, and there are barriers to them doing that as well. Financial struggles, as Niloha was saying, isolation, transport, especially when people have been isolated for long periods during the period in which they were claiming asylum. And I think, obviously, access to English language as well. The restrictions that's placed on ESOL for asylum seekers mean that often, you know, when people do gain status, they are, you know, not in the best position. And obviously, we would recommend lifting those as well.
I won't repeat a lot of what they've said, but just to add, I think the English language piece is a big one. We talk a lot about skills and people like Niloha, who have a huge amount to contribute and have aspirations to work in the same careers they had in their countries of origin. But it needs to be coupled with the English language capabilities for them to be able to utilise those skills. And I think English language provision is patchy at best, and there's long waiting lists, and the time taken to achieve fluency for a lot of people is very lengthy with existing provision, which becomes a massive challenge for people who not just want to get a job, but want to get a job commensurate with their prior work experience. As Tara was saying, the lack of employment provision in terms of sophisticated, professionalised, scalable support is not there in the refugee sector, which is in large part why we were set up a few years ago. And then the other point I'd make is around digital exclusion, and this is something that I think has been exacerbated by COVID, the digitalisation of the economy, but also service provision, charities increasingly providing support online. And that's fine for a lot of people in the refugee community, but there's also a lot of people within the refugee community that are increasingly isolated and excluded as a result of them being unable to either access provision or access the labour market because of their inability to either utilise technology or have access to technology.
Thank you, Matthew. And Siân, I don't know if you wanted to add anything?
Just adding on to Matt's point really around the specialist employment provision from City of Sanctuary as an umbrella organisation, it's extremely patchy. And what we often see is when it's mainstream advice providers, they don't actually know the pathways for requalification. So, you know, we've seen lots of unique ways of avoiding people having to repeat their prior learning and experience, but they're often quite bespoke programmes in certain parts of the UK. So specifically, we were working with the Welsh Government when in my previous job around pathways, so working with colleges of sanctuary to recognise people's learning and provide references. So take a trade, for example, you know, a young boy from Eritrea, lots of work experience in various trades, and he was able to demonstrate that experience within a college vocational setting, where then he has a reference, can get a CSCS card very quickly. So all of these kind of really bespoke specialist pathways for people to be able to get into the employment market. It's very sporadic across the UK, and unfortunately then the mainstream providers just wouldn't have that kind of knowledge and experience to be able to support people, when, you know, actually in some circumstances people can be supported quite quickly. So I think, you know, I know we've talked a lot about barriers, but there's lots of really good solutions out there that can get people into the employment market fairly quickly.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Siân. Now, just to heed the Chair's warning on timing, I've got 2 more questions, but rather than opening up to the whole panel, I'll just offer them to specific guests, if that's all right. Tara, I'll be coming back to you to ask, why does the gap in employment rates between refugees and the general population persist for many years after asylum migrants have settled in the UK? And I think this has kind of actually just been covered by this conversation, so I might just drill it down and say, if you think any of the barriers that have been discussed, or indeed with the employment gap, manifests differently in London. So obviously that's our specific focus. If there are additional barriers or circumstances in London that you think is worth drawing to the attention of the committee.
I mean, I definitely think there are things that can be done for people with refugee status in London in terms of ESOL provision and skills training as well. I mean, one of the things that we find time and time again is that, you know, people who are seeking asylum or who have status, they are so keen to do as much English language as possible. And some of the barriers to that are the facts such as the limit on the number of programs that you can do. So if you are accessing ESOL through a college that may be very far away from your house or where you're living, and then there is a community centre nearby where you could do a couple more hours, you know, that's often prohibited because you can't do two separate programs because of the funding restrictions. So I think, things like that, really making sure that there is as much English language provision as possible for people, and that barriers like that are lifted, are really important. Again, the access to ESOL often affects women more than men, especially if the male member of the household is, for example, the person who's registered with the job centre. Then it may be that the ESOL provision is more kind of going towards them. Women members of the household often have childcare responsibilities as well. So really ensuring that there is learning support there in terms of provision of childcare, transport, looking at the provision of ESOL, and linking ESOL into employability as well. So people who are not allowed to work are also not allowed to do English language courses that could lead to employment. So the whole nature of that is so contradictory, because, as Niloha was saying, really it's employment-based skills, volunteering, and English language that's so important for people.
Absolutely, I would agree with you. The system is entirely contradictory. I'll just move on to the next question, unless there was anyone from the panel who burningly wanted to add to that. And please feel free then to come into this question if you feel like you do. What differences exist between the support received by those arriving through the resettlement schemes and those who've gone through the asylum process after arriving into the UK, and what impact does this have on refugees? And I'll come back to you for that, Tara, if that's okay.
Yes, sure. I mean, I think what's important to note about this is that in terms of resettlement, there are now very, very small numbers of people coming to the UK on specific resettlement schemes. So we found, for example, this year, of the total number of people that were granted asylum, humanitarian protection, or other forms of leave, only 1,391 of them were resettled through the various schemes, and that's 8.7% of the total number who are granted asylum. So the huge majority of people are actually coming through the asylum system. And of course, there have been resettlement schemes in the past, and they have involved having packages, support packages with English language provision, and sometimes with employment provisions as well. And of course, the visa schemes, which are not technically resettlement schemes, but the various Ukraine schemes, for example, come with English language support and right to work as well, and of course the BNO scheme as well. So I think what we're seeing here is that in terms of support for people in the asylum system, there are no really bespoke packages of support. There is no kind of national level support for ESOL, and of course they are also restricted in terms of the right to work as well. Often there is the costs of things like IELTS tests and having your qualifications translated, which are really prohibited, are borne by the asylum seekers. So there is really a kind of, very patchy system. And of course, one of the things that we would argue is that there should be parity among all people who are fleeing persecution and conflict. That's what is in the interests of people seeking asylum. We know that people seeking asylum, 77%, over 2/3 of them, will be granted refugee status, and that's what's also really important in terms of their integration as soon as possible into the community.
Niloha, Siân, and Matthew, I don't know if you want to add anything, because that was a really substantial response.
Just very quickly, and maybe I'll talk a bit about this a bit later in some of the follow-up questions, but Tara mentioned that... sorry.
Hey, Siân. Did you want to come in? Because Matthew's just started speaking, but we'll bring you in afterwards. Or was there something you wanted to...
I can wait. I'll wait for...
Grand, thank you.
Tara's completely right in terms of the differences in provision and how how little provision there is for those that are going through the asylum system. The Home Office attempted to address this somewhat with piloting a refugee transitions outcome fund, which is the first ever social impact bond for refugees in the UK, which is a very innovative type of funding, which I'm a massive proponent for. And this has been piloted in Greater Manchester, Birmingham, West Midlands, Plymouth and the North East. And we're a delivery partner in Birmingham and GM, and that's specifically targeting those going through the asylum system with wraparound housing, integration and employability and self-employment support delivered through the combined or local authorities to support people from the day that they essentially get status. So a completely holistic provision with the idea of the ultimate aim of getting someone into a job. And this was deemed as a pilot that could then be rolled out to this cohort longer term.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I mean, sorry, just quickly, how does the funding on that work? So is it part government, part local council, part partner? It's
cross-departmental, so it's Home Office led, but also involves DWP and DCMS and DLUC. So the nature of maybe I can talk a bit about funding. So I'm a big believer in funding right, because I think I see a lot of wastage in terms of how money is given. And a lot of a lot of funding traditionally with employability is output focused about, we'll pay you for an intervention. You write a CV, here's 100 quid, but you don't actually know whether you're getting them into a job. It doesn't drive necessarily good provision. Then you have outcomes-based funding, which is if you achieve a job, we'll give you X amount of money. That's a disincentive for a lot of organisations, doesn't necessarily attract the right organisations, and it's hard for specialist providers to deliver that because of cash flow issues, because you're only paid once you achieve the outcome. What social impact bonds do brilliantly is you have an intermediary, a social investor. In our case, it's Big Issue Invest. Bridges are also heavily involved. They take on all of the financial risk. So what they say is, we'll take it's still outcomes based, we'll take the outcome payment from the Home Office, but we'll provide the cash flow up front to the delivery partners. So we work innovatively with this consortium to design an intervention that we think is ultimately going to get someone into jobs. And to some extent, the Home Office can take a back foot and say, well, it's up to you to achieve an outcome because we're only going to pay on outcomes. But it enables us with that social investor to deliver interventions that are ultimately going to get jobs, with the social investor taking on the risk that if we don't deliver, they take the financial hit. And that's being increasingly rolled out cross-departmental. It's not going to work for every cause and every intervention, but I think in terms of refugees, with the ultimate intention of getting someone integrated, if it's well designed, it has a brilliant opportunity to create a holistic service that is joined up with the local authority. Because a lot of the problem with asylum seekers is we have to find them. They don't naturally come to us. In terms of Niloha's point, people slip through the cracks, and it's through word of mouth. But this is an opportunity, and I would really urge, with other funding opportunities potential funding opportunities in London, that this is a really, really good way of achieving that. Especially within the context of this kind of two-tiered provision between those through resettlement schemes and those going through the asylum system.
Yeah, I mean, with the permission of the chair, I think it'd be great to get some follow-up information on the Refugee Outcome Transition Fund and think about what a pilot in London could look like and how it's sort of going in Greater Manchester, I think is particularly where you're focused on. Chair, I know we're short on time. I just know that Siân had indicated to come in, and then I'll pass back over to you.
It was a very similar point, actually, given that, the way the funding worked for the resettlement schemes, it went to local authorities who might not have the expertise or the specialist knowledge of how to support people in a bespoke way. So obviously Matt explained how it could be done at scale, and to think about how local authorities can work, and how we've been supporting local authorities and London boroughs in London to think about their sanctuary strategies and sharing best practice across the boroughs to be able to identify when we can better use kind of resources to support people generally, but also around employment initiatives as well.
No, that's great. Thank you. And I'll pass back over to the chair.
No, that was great. It's, we're looking for innovative ideas and solutions. So I'm really appreciative of any extra information you can send to us about this. Thank you. We're moving on to Assembly Member Bailey.
Sorry? Oh, sorry. Let me start with Matt. I'll address this question to Matt. What provision is in place to support refugees into work in London, and is this adequate to prepare them for employment?
In terms of the support, you've got the ESOL provision that we've discussed before. We're actually in receipt of some GLA funding to provide employability support to refugees in London. That is an ESF contract, which makes up a lot of the refugee provision in the UK. But that's something that we're in receipt of at the moment, and we're delivering up until the end of this calendar year. But that's a relatively small amount of people. That's not necessarily going to address the problem in its entirety. Other than that, you're looking at your generic employability provision, the local authority DWP provision, which is fine, but it isn't of the intensity or specialism that is required. So you're largely looking at refugee charities like ourselves, Refugee Council and others, who largely fund this work philanthropically, but we're supporting 800 to 900 people per year in London, and the volume of people that would be willing to access our support is probably at least 10 times that. The Refugee Transitions Outcome Fund I mentioned before isn't in London. It was being piloted in other areas, but that's something that I think would work really well here. The only other thing to mention is it doesn't exist now, but the Home Office have recently procured the Refugee Employability Programme, which is a government-funded employability project for refugees, which will include London. And that is the procurement process is at the moment, and it is to be launched in August, with delivery starting then. And to some extent, that is looking to address this imbalance between resettled refugees and spontaneous arrivals, by providing employability support across both cohorts to balance it out, which is positive, and that's pan-UK and looking at high volumes. Some of the challenges with that will be that it's not accessible for all refugees, so it's people that came after a certain date. So it would be June last year. So there's a lot of people before that, the Ukrainians, a lot of the Afghans wouldn't be eligible for that provision. And it's very employment focused, so it doesn't take into account the housing, the integration, and other factors that are quite integral to actually someone finding work.
Can I just ask a very specific question? You made a comment that it's refugees don't come to you; you have to find them. Is there funding for that very specific piece of work? Because it dawns on me that if the clients are there but you're not making the connection, it doesn't matter what support's out there. You need to find them first. So is anybody, charitably, government or any otherwise, supporting that specific start point?
From the ecosystem that we're in London, no. But when I say we go out to find them, we develop relationships with other organisations that support them with other interventions. But we run a waiting list of 3 or 4 months and have done since our existence. But the majority of people will have been here several years post receiving status before accessing our employment provision, and will either be referred to us by another organisation or referred to us by themselves. If we are looking at scaling this provision to all refugees across the UK, we need to find a mechanism that the moment someone gets their refugee status, that they are looped into provision that is available to them. And that, I think, is a really key thing that is missing, because the earlier intervention, the better the long-term outcomes, but the intervention there needs to be well-funded interventions at the time of referral, which I think is where the Refugee Transition Outcomes Fund model could really work, because the idea is working collaboratively with the combined and local authorities to get the intervention during that post-decision phase, when people are at the highest risk of destitution, and can be forwarded onto a consortium of a housing provider, an integration provider, an English provider, and an employment provider, who can provide them with the wraparound support to get them into employment as soon as possible. But from our understanding of the ecosystem, that doesn't exist right now in London. Okay,
we asked those questions because we're building a list of recommendations for the mayor, so that became... Through your work, have you found there's a difference in employment outcomes for those who've gone through the asylum process after arriving in the UK and those who've gone through the resettlement schemes?
Yeah, actually, I got some of that. sorry. I've got some data on that from...
I've just asked number 10.
You've asked number 10, fine. No.
Keep going, that's fine.
Do you want me to answer
fine.
that?
No, yes, I do. I said
Okay.
do. You're seeing the workings underneath our mechanism. I am correct. Keep going, please.
Well, I can provide a bit of demographic breakdown as well to go with the outcomes.
Please do.
So clients on the resettlement schemes are more likely to be female, 53% to 38% for spontaneous arrivals. More likely to have many years of experience, 24% over 13 years experience compared to 12% spontaneous arrivals. More than twice as likely to be carers for young children. Half as likely to have mental health issues as spontaneous arrivals. Lower levels of English, but have higher aspirations for senior level roles, which probably aligns to or correlates with
So
their...
they have lower levels of English than spontaneous arrivals?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a surprise.
In our sample size of about 2,500 refugees. But what you have here, which I think is interesting, is people that are very highly skilled but have much lower levels of English. And I think we quite often talk about highly skilled without thinking about the English components. And they have to go in correlation with one another, because if you're an investment banker, you're not going to walk into a job in investment banking if you're illiterate in English. So I think we need to look at those in harmony with one another. So that would lead to some of the employment outcomes, which actually has higher employment outcomes for those that spontaneously arrive. So 36% of clients that arrive spontaneously will achieve an employment outcome with us, compared to 20% of those going through the resettlement scheme. Now, looking at the reasons why people going through the resettlement scheme are quite rightly picked based on vulnerability, and a lot of people come with complex needs, both their own and their immediate dependents. And we support a lot of people that have complex health issues or immediate dependents that become extremely prohibitive to them finding work. So I'd be very keen to emphasise that I don't think that's a lack of appetite or desire to work, but more of some of the structural barriers created by some of their own kind of complex needs.
Okay, so it sounded to me that they're not really comparable. They're very different cohorts of people.
They're incomparable. And every visa route creates very different circumstances. You look at the Ukrainians and Afghans at the moment, it's the Afghan cohort and we're still in contact with a lot of them that are still in hotels, nearly 18 months later. Without that stable housing, it's nigh impossible to get them jobs. We've had regular contacts with some of the leading community leaders in the Afghan community. The mental health deterioration over the last 18 months, as you might imagine, has been stark. That, again, is a big challenging factor. However, people going through a traditional resettlement scheme would have more stable accommodation, which would make it easier for them to get a job. So every visa route and pathway creates its own challenges that is very unique and it can't really be compared to other client groups.
That's interesting. It's a good piece of learning. On your website, you have people's stories, and it is incredible stories of people who've come with a certain amount of qualifications, have then had to retrain and pay to have those qualifications validated, etc. Is that a regular occurrence, and do they have to do different training and gain different skills, please do come in, than someone who started their journey here?
It depends on the career, and it depends on the industry body as to what regulations they might have to requalify. What an engineer might have to do is different to what a medical professional would have to do.
Sense, yeah.
In terms of our intervention, we provide grants to individuals to pay for that requalification, because access to capital is very, very difficult. So that's one thing that we do to support them. The other thing that I think is really important is traditional provision for refugees, and that comes back to how their services are funded, is aimed at unemployed refugees, whereas most people, even if they do ultimately requalify to the career that they had in their country of origin, that won't be the first job they have in this country. There is probably a period of working in retail, working in hospitality, a bridging job as you look at requalifying and doing evening classes and improving your English. But a lot of services aren't open to people that are in work or underemployed. So one of the things that we did when we set up the organisation was make sure that we recognise integration as a long-term journey, and there might be multiple employment outcomes along the way, but we will support you on that longer-term integration journey. Because one of the things I've noticed is a lot of organisations that only support people that are unemployed, those individuals bounce between services because they get into a retail job, but they want to become a doctor. But to qualify for some types of support, they would only be able to get that if they were unemployed. So I think devising funding and interventions that recognise that integration is a longer-term journey and allow for in-work provision is really, really critical.
Okay, interesting. Would you like to come in?
Well, I would like to give some recommendations, and I differ a little bit. I believe that, from the point of view of a refugee, I believe that integration starts from day one. So that means that I know that some of us have access to ESOL courses. That's pretty good. And we are very thankful for that. But I believe that if you are integrated or immersed in a placement or an internship or shadowing or anything, that will improve your speaking skills, your listening skills, and that would make integration easier for you. Not only English classes, because at the end of the day, it's just technical, English that you learned at school, but if you are in a job placement or shadowing someone, the learning of English is going to be easier. So we should be given those opportunities to be on a placement or an internship, whatever you call it. And that's why we need a specialist service advice to know where to go, and not only for word of mouth. So I will encourage the authorities to create manuals to specialist service advice, and also to facilitate these volunteer placements, and also support sanctuary in politics courses. And yes, just because the length of the asylum system can take ages. So you're not going to start when you have the right to work. You should start from day one. Be ready to work. So in the meantime, you can attend courses. You could be given courses on, let's say, safeguarding, IT skills, or anything related to your previous skills. So I think this should be done at the beginning. So I will encourage the Mayor of London to start working on this sort of training program since day one, not wait until we have the right to work. And also, enable opportunities for asylum seekers and to keep their knowledge up to date. So that would be attending to courses, to conferences, and also subscription to libraries and subscriptions to magazines like BMA. And that would keep our knowledge up to date. And I would also recommend to encourage some organizations to be organizations of sanctuary. That means that it will help refugees to integrate and to learn the technical language and to build up their networks and to start liaising with people who are in within your skills or within your field, the fields of study. Yeah. And also
it's much the same that anybody who's trying to move into a very professional job would need the kind of support. If you come from a poor background and you were born here, it's the same sort of career development path that you would need, maybe minus ESOL, because you may well already have English. But thank you for your comments. Before I hand back to the Chair, would our online guests like to make any addition?
So I just wanted to add on Matt's point around integration. So I've been working with refugees for a very long time, showing my age, but in 2008, when we had the Refugee Integration and Employment Service, when support was given to people for move-on support very early on, and so once someone had a decision, they were referred for that advice and support, because the problem we have is such sporadic advice and support. It means that people won't get support for their housing, they will not then falls sort of through the cracks, and there'll be even more issues when it comes to trying to support someone into employment. So having like a seamless advice provision where people are able to be signposted in a really fast and kind of easy way, where people don't get bounced from one service provision to another. So I guess that's also about the London boroughs working collaboratively really with the third sector in London is crucial.
Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you so much. I'd just like to welcome, we've got some additional guests in the gallery today. Welcome the School Council from Salisbury Manor Primary School from Waltham Forest. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. We'll give you a quick wave, and I hope you find this really informative. We're moving on to our next Assembly Member, Assembly Member Ahmed.
Thank you very much, Chair. And before I move on to my questions, if I could just take a few seconds. I probably have a very deeper understanding and perspective of the issues, being married to somebody who was a child refugee. And I would like to thank Niloha, Dr. Rangel, for sharing your experience. My husband is now, he qualified as a doctor in his country of origin and had to go through exactly what you have described, you know, to the extent of being told that he was overqualified to stack supermarket shelves whilst he was waiting to try and find some funding to requalify. And for me, I'm somebody who hates waste, and it seems as if in this country at the moment, where we so desperately need the skills and the abilities that we have on our doorstep here, and because of government policy, we're not utilising those. Thank you very much for sharing what you have shared. Moving on to my question. We've talked about ESOL, and we've talked about what the difference ESOL funding can make, and what the process can make to those seeking asylum and to refugees. Could you just give us an example? So I'm going to go to Matthew, because I think, Matthew, you've talked a lot about it, just in terms of what the Mayor is doing at the moment, and whether what you have from City Hall is enough to tackle the barriers to employment for refugees in London. And can you give us some examples of the Mayor's skills programmes where they have helped to improve access to employment for refugees and those seeking asylum?
Absolutely. The thing with London compared to different localities is the sheer size of the geography. And although we've got we're supporting a significant number of people, and with the support of the GLA and the funding that they're given, it's not through a combination of the size of the funding and the eligibility criteria attached to it. It's only enabling us to support a small proportion. So I think that some of the interventions are good, but they need to be scaled. That intervention is the funding that we receive to fund our work is the only real interaction that we have with any of the skills programs, or we don't really have any interaction with them. I'm a big proponent of interventions being refugee or specific to that client group and refugee specific. And I think a lot of the skills programs or skills provision funding that we see across all of the localities that we work, when it's more generic, it becomes a bit more challenging to the specific needs that refugees face. So I would be a big proponent of funding work that is ring-fenced for this specific cohort, adapted to the specific needs that they face. The English language provision is patchy, as we've discussed, and it's highly variable from local authority to local authority, and people are waiting very, very long periods of time. To the point I made earlier, to some extent, ESOL needs to be rethought, in the sense that if we're attempting to achieve fluency in some individuals, the intensity of provision is not high enough. It can take a very, very long time for people to achieve fluency. And without getting too technical, it takes 30 or 40 hours to make an incremental and meaningful improvement in your English. Lots of incremental improvements to become fluent, but that's a couple of 5 to 10 year process if you look at some existing English language provision. So I think ESOL needs to be rethought in terms of how it's delivered and how it's funded and how it's structured and its intensity. But it's very... the problem with ESOL provision at the moment is a lot of charities are resorting to delivering it themselves. And we find ourselves delivering English language provision in a way that we ideally wouldn't want to or have to if English language provision was better funded and better equipped to address the needs of our client group. So we actually, as a result, bring things in-house. So I think that's something that's a big challenge. I think when funding interventions with refugees, what I see a lot of is looking at, let's fund ESOL, let's fund skills, let's fund employment, and there's nothing that pieces them together, because we recognise that the barriers that refugees face are complex and they intersect with one another. But because of the size of the geography of London, it's very hard for us as service providers to piece all those different things together. And without coming back to the Refugee Transitions Outcome Fund, if there is better joined up work between the combined authority, the local authority, and specialist providers within a funded consortium, we can better tap into things that already exist. Because I have no doubt there's lots of interventions that our client group could really benefit from that we don't necessarily know is out there. And what we've seen through the work with the combined authority in Greater Manchester is their ability to piece that together for us and coordinate based on their knowledge of what is already being delivered in that space. And to your point about hating wastage, I hate that too. And I think that lack of coordination is causing duplication of services and a huge amount of money to be wasted as a result.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting just to hear that and the technical detail there as well. One very quick question to Tara, Chair. Tara, Refugee Action found that funding for ESOL in England has significantly reduced under both the Coalition and Conservative governments from 212.3 million in 2008 to 105 million in 2018, a reduction of 107 million or over 107 million. What impact has this had on refugees and on the economy, on the wider economy, do you think?
Thank you. Yes, it's a very important point. I mean, some of the things that we find in terms of the experiences of refugees is that they are facing very, very long waiting lists for ESOL classes. Often the ESOL provision that is available is in an area which is very difficult for them to access in terms of there may be they have to get transport to that area, and because obviously if they have been on asylum support for many years, there are financial difficulties with that. There are also problems in terms of the number of hours that are being offered as well. They're really inadequate in order to really make a difference in someone's ability to learn English. And what we find is that, again, as I said before, people are so keen to learn English. They want to access all of the English that's available. They will, forego spending on essential items like food so that they can get a bus to go to a library to do some online English provision or go and volunteer to try and build up their skills or try and access another English language class. That's the kind of reality of people's lives that we're talking about. And the lack of provision of ESOL also, as Matt described, I mean, there are some great programs being run by NGOs and in local authorities, but it's really so patchy. And I think what that means as well for refugees is that it's just an incredibly confusing landscape to try to navigate when you don't have experience of the UK UK ESOL system or the teaching system.
Tara,
yeah.
forgive me for interrupting. We are on the clock. But what does that mean for the wider economy?
I think for the wider economy, it's contributing to the skills shortage, and it's contributing to the lack of ability to be able to use the skills and experience of this kind of important group of people, and that has really long-term economic impacts.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We'll be picking up on a lot of the things you've just raised with the Deputy Mayor of Skills in the next session. Assembly Member Polanski.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to say, first of all, thank you very much for all the work that you're doing, including Siân on Zoom. You, I think, summed it up well there, this important group of people, and I'd like to see politicians from all parties making positive arguments for refugees and people seeking asylum and the contribution they bring to our society. And too often there is that stigma, and I think all of you are great advocates for positive reasons that we should treat people with humanitarianism and dignity, which shouldn't even need positive reasons. That should just be a given, but also there's very clear economic arguments for it too. Tara, if I can begin with you, really this is a summary question. I'm looking for what reforms would you want to see in London around employment opportunities, what would have the most significant impact, and crucially, particularly for this body, what would you like to see the Mayor do? And just to sum up, I think we've heard from Niloha around training opportunities on day one, organisations of sanctuary. We've heard about integration from Siân. We've heard about the lack of coordination and waste from Matthew. So is there anything that you would kind of finally add to the conversation, particularly around what the Mayor should do?
Yes, I mean, I think what's really important is both to look at the what can be done in terms of the ESOL and skills provision in London, what can be done to try to educate employers about sponsorship licenses, about the complexity of the rules surrounding employing refugees, try and build up their confidence in employing refugees. Also, just to advocate for a change in national policy, because that's what's going to make a difference in terms of the lives of refugees and people seeking asylum, and what's going to make a difference in terms of London's economy and the level of integration. So what we would advocate is for people to be able to gain the right to work after they have worked, after they have waited for 6 months on an initial decision, and for adult dependents as well, unconstrained by the shortage occupation list. Also, I think it's really important to advocate for the removal of policies that present barriers in terms of people accessing ESOL, education and employability programs from day one. And some of those policies are part of no recourse to public funds, for example, that limit people's access to education and to volunteering and skills programs. And so I think advocating for the lifting of no recourse to public funds is also really, really important as well.
Thank you, that's really clear. I want to ask that same question to everyone else, but just before I do, Tara, just one final question, particularly for you from Refugee Action. LGBT and disabled refugees and people seeking asylum probably face additional barriers. Could you just give us if there's any particular things that need to be focused on those two particular groups?
Absolutely. I think, people who have fled persecution and conflict in their countries of origin, I think the point that we've all made is that these are people with enormous skills. These are not people who need to be saved. These are people who can make a really important contribution to the UK, and they're people who want to make this contribution. The barriers that they are facing are systemic and institutional barriers that are being put in their way by these policies. And so in terms of LGBTQIA refugees and disabled refugees, it's really important that they are able to share their skills and experience without encountering the kind of systemic barriers that would have held them back, that they're able to start their new lives in Britain and they are able to do so without fear that they will be subject to prejudice and subject to discrimination. Giving people the right to work as early as possible, involving them in the formal labour market, also means that they can be educated about their rights at work, and they can be educated about the laws surrounding discrimination at work. Informalising work and forcing people into a position where they have to choose between destitution and maybe working in the informal economy makes them even more vulnerable to exploitative labour practices and discrimination as well. So formalising the system, lifting the barriers to employment, and changing our whole mindset, I think, around refugees and people seeking asylum, as people have enormous amount to contribute.
There's a lot to do. Thank you, Siân. If I can come to you, so the same question around what reforms would you like to see, and particularly for the Mayor?
So I guess to thank the Mayor and obviously the Chair of this committee and the committee for the positive vision of welcome that we are seeing in London, and overwhelmingly now we have 23 London Borough Councils, particularly thanks to this Chair, I think, in coming forward and committing to becoming welcoming places of safety, councils of sanctuary. So there's a lot for us to do. We didn't expect when we started to work in London 2 years ago to have this overwhelming interest. So I think for us it's the capacity now to work in London and support those local authorities. But I think Niloha alluded to organisations of sanctuary. We'd like to be doing more with businesses and businesses of sanctuary, working on the same model that we have seen and has been so successful with local authorities. So support for that work would be much appreciated.
Thank you, Siân. And Matthew, if I can come to you.
Well, without meaning to bang the drum, looking purely from a funding perspective, I think you can't really look much beyond the Refugee Transition Outcomes Fund for the best type of funding for refugee integration in the UK, and very happy to share learnings from that and bring in kind of counterparts at GMCA who can share their learnings too. I think designing an intervention that enables a more joined up provision with local authorities to support people as early as possible post getting a decision, that joins up with other provision that already exists within local and combined authorities, and brings in specialist providers who can support across housing, integration, employment and self-employment is really important. Making sure that it's open to people regardless of the visa or how they arrived here, so it's consistent across spontaneous arrivals and resettlement schemes, and also involves people that are long-term unemployed, so those that have arrived historically, because a lot of funding is only available for those that got status in the last 12 months. But you've got a lot of people who are accessing our services who have been unemployed for 5, 10, 15 years, as well as to my point earlier around provision for those that are in work and underemployed that could be upskilled. The second point is less about funding and reform, but there's a lot of great things that are going on already. We've got 60 businesses, household names, multinational companies that are actively hiring refugees. And the overwhelming question I get asked from senior business leaders is we want to do something, but we don't know how to. And we provide a practical solution. So if there is anything that we can do in terms of raising profile of existing interventions that businesses are doing to encourage others to do the same, I think that would be really welcome as well.
I think that's a really good point. I admit I wasn't aware of these businesses employing refugees in great numbers, so I agree it'd be really good to promote that work and hopefully inspire other businesses to do so. And Niloha, it feels appropriate that you have the last word on this.
Well, I would like to, let's say, finish off giving some minor recommendations. That would be that the main purpose or the main thing to do would be that work on integration and how can you achieve integrations within asylum seekers and refugees is continuing with these ESOL programs, but also try to immerse them in placements, because you learn English at school, but then you go back home and then you start talking in your native language. So you gotta keep on practicing your English, and one of the ways is to immerse in placements where you are forced to speak English all the time. So that would be a solution. We can be shadowing, we can be interacting with native speakers. So that would be one recommendation. And also, well, of course, lift the ban, because it's been proven that once you start working, it gives you a purpose to get out of bed, to do something productive, because we have skills. We really want to integrate. We really want to contribute with this society. We want to pay taxes. We're very proud to be here, and I think the UK is proud to have us here. And we really want to contribute and be thankful and give back what is being given to us. And also, well, encourage organizations, as we already said, to become organizations of sanctuary, helping refugees. And also creating these opportunities. We are working and tackling modern slavery, and also not letting perpetuate mental health problems, because usually people come with mental health problems, but if they're not working, you know that we become more anxious, we become more depressed, because we don't have a sense of living. And also, it's I think I will finish off saying that the true measure of society, it is a quote from Mahatma Gandhi, but the true measure of society can be found how it treats its most vulnerable members. Thank you.
Thank you, and I should hope we're all really proud of you. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. That was incredibly powerful, and so grateful to the guests who have attended this morning online and in the chamber. And Niloha, thank you so much for your final words. I really do believe that we've learnt so much from your contributions, and from a personal perspective, you know, and I'm sure many others agree, the right to work is a human right, and it's our job here today to make sure that that happens. And if London is truly open, it really needs to be open for every single refugee and asylum seeker. So thank you so much for your time today. We will now adjourn for a few minutes before welcoming our second panel of guests, but you are very welcome to join us here in the chamber as well to listen to the rest. Thank you so much. Welcome back to the second part of our discussion, and I would now like to welcome our second panel of guests. Jules Pipe, CBE, Deputy Mayor for Planning, Regeneration and Skills, and Dr. Debbie Weeks-Bernard, Deputy Mayor for Communities and Social Justice. Thank you so much for coming today. We've had a really great discussion, and we are going to be moving on to our questions that are going to be based on our next section on mayoral activity. Let me just read through this bit first. I would like to just thank our guests for this morning, and can I ask the committee to note the report and discussion? Brilliant. Can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the discussion? Excellent. And can I? And I think I need to stop there. Right. Right. Let's move on. Yeah. Mayoral activity. We're going to be asking our deputy mayors some specific questions related to what we've been talking to with our previous guests. Firstly, Jules, how does the mayor support refugees from resettlement schemes such as Ukrainian refugees and those arriving under ARAP differ from the support for those who have been through the standard asylum process?
I'm sorry, you'd have to explain that a bit more. I haven't. I wouldn't make a differentiation particularly between the two initially. I mean, the mayor in this term has committed very much to expanding the eligibility for access and funding for AEB, and probably the key way in which the mayor has done that is to extend eligibility for AEB funded courses to learners who are in low paid work, and obviously that will encompass all refugees equally. There's been further flexibilities on introducing, for example, 10% of the AEB formula funded allocation can enable providers, colleges, for example, to fund a broader range of provision and wraparound support, particularly, for example, for ESOL learners. So again, clearly of help to all refugees and asylum seekers. He's increased the rates, some 13.5% payable for learners in AEB funded courses. That obviously has a big impact on ESOL provision and attracting and retaining ESOL staff. So refugees and asylum seekers benefit in that way. Fully fund so those are the kind of the general approach, which clearly does benefit disproportionately the low paid, and therefore that will disproportionately affect benefit asylum seekers and refugees. There's also targeted work that's gone on, so fully funding AEB eligible people who are seeking asylum to enrol on skills courses. That was from the 21-22 academic year. Prior to that, the national rules were that there'd be a co-funding element, so basically people had to make a contribution themselves, and regardless of whether they were in low pay or no pay. The other targeted move that we've made is remove long residency requirements as well for migrant Londoners to access training so they can easily support London's economy and also obviously benefit themselves with greater social integration. Before then, migrant Londoners would have needed to wait 3 years before they could access support for AEB funding. And of course, this has particularly benefited new arrivals such as from Hong Kong. And we've widened funding support as well for training in Londoners who are not in employment and who are unable to evidence that they receive benefits, not least because perhaps they are not in receipt of any benefits. And previously, they have been completely locked out of receiving funding for AEB courses. And a particular beneficiary from that will be for those who have no recourse to public funds. And they will now be able to access AEB courses. So all these funding flexibilities in their totality have definitely benefited refugees and asylum seekers. There are some additional flexibilities for Afghan and Ukrainian refugees on top of those core broad ones. Much of those are due to their visa conditions and have been applied because it's a national requirement. They're not local. So those who are already on dedicated schemes have access to ESOL provision across London, for example. Where the GLA has gone a bit further than that, though, is that the national requirements are for those who come through the standard recognised schemes, whereas in London we aren't requiring them to come through those national recognised schemes. So we will fund all Afghan and Ukrainian nationals.
So, I mean, I think the discussion that we've just had, there was a clear impression of a two-tier system that was coming across, and I think, Debbie, if I can bring you into that as well, if you can add anything more to what Jules has said. But I think there is a concern that there is a two-tier approach. What's your position on this? What's the Mayor's position, and what action is the Mayor taking to ensure there is more parity between refugees and the support that they are receiving?
So yes, there is a two-tier approach. We know that for those who are seeking asylum, they do not have the permission to work whilst their applications are being considered. And we also know that this can create real difficulties for those who then become newly recognised refugees to then be able to access work, because clearly there will be gaps in their employment record, which can greatly then impact their abilities to really get on in the labour market. The Mayor's been, and as Jules pointed out, the Mayor's been very clear that anyone who comes to the UK or comes to London seeking asylum, who seeks to settle in the UK or to settle in London, should have the abilities to integrate, to find support, to find welcome, and that there should be parity in the system. But unfortunately, we know that that parity doesn't necessarily exist. So some of the flexibilities in funding that I know that the Mayor has used through the AEB has been incredibly welcome. So ensuring that people are able to access funding so that they can take part in ESOL, so to learn English so that they can fully participate in their local communities, and giving them the ability to do that after 6 months is very, very welcome. The Mayor's used his voice in advocacy to ensure that some of those barriers to being able to feel that you are part of your local community are raised. So he will join with campaigns like Lift the Ban, which specifically requires or requests the government to reconsider the ban on enabling individuals who are seeking asylum to be able to work. And he has written to the Home Secretary and has lobbied with parliamentarians to join in broader voices to ensure that those sorts of issues are raised. So yes, there is a two-tier system. It is unfortunate that unfortunately it means that when we are seeking, and I know that that's what the questions for this committee are specifically targeted on, when we are seeking to ensure that everyone has the ability to participate economically, to contribute to London's economy, this system unfortunately creates barriers for those individuals to be able to do so. One other thing to sort of to note here, which is also quite important, is that some of the barriers that refugees and those seeking asylum experience when trying to gain access to work also include the recognition of their qualifications. So the work that the AEB does is really important in giving people access to skills, helping them to gain qualifications so that they can thrive and progress. But we also know that there are many individuals who have gained qualifications in their home countries which are not necessarily recognised here in the UK. So again, the Mayor, alongside others, has raised this as an issue, has included that in the advocacy that he's made to the Home Secretary and asked for those qualifications also to be recognised.
We're looking for not just words but actions as well, and I think we'll be really trying to pull out as much as we can in terms of what we can do more. And what the Mayor can be doing more in terms of actions as well. So, I mean, I'll keep that in that perspective for our next Assembly Member. Assembly Member Garrett, you're going to be asking a few more questions.
Morning. No, not morning. Afternoon. Oh, it is still morning. We've got 4 minutes to go. I think, so my first question to you, Jules, was going to be about the work in the AEB or adult education to support ESOL. I think maybe you've answered it, but I don't know if you specifically. I was going to ask what changes the Mayor has made since he took over adult education in London, and what difference that will have made. But I don't know if there's anything you want to add to what you just said. I think maybe you've just answered that.
Just for time, just to add numbers really. I mean, through the AEB, the Mayor is the main funder of ESOL in London, and those flexibilities have all led to supporting those numbers. And during the year 21-22, we had 47,000 different learners enrol in over 90,000 aims through entry-level, level 1 and level 2 ESOL, and resulted in 78,000 achievements. An achievement could have been a completion and a certificate, or an actual qualification. Okay. One of the things that we heard, I think, quite clearly in the first half was the fact that you've given us lots of numbers, but one of the challenges is about getting from, particularly if you're going to work, it's not enough just to have sort of, tourist English where you can order a kilo of peaches at the market or something. You need to be able to actually, achieve fluency or close to it. And there was quite a clear message that the ESOL training that's happening isn't really getting there. It's not intensive enough to get people there. And I think the word rethinking was used quite a bit. So I don't know whether you're aware of that weakness, and secondly, what rethinking is going on to try and achieve that. No, I'm not aware of that weakness. I'd be interested to know where in those different levels, multiple levels that are available, where that weakness is perceived to be. I don't want to put words in people's mouths. I dare say you get a transcript, but my sense was that what's being provided is quite sort of widely spaced, low number of hours, and I think in terms of contact hours, in order to get somebody from a new speaker up to a level of fluency where they could engage in a meeting like this or engage in a workplace, that's quite a steep ramp, and what's being provided is nothing like a big enough push to get up it. I think that was what I heard. I don't know. So it's intensity rather than content.
Yes. Number of hours to get from new learner to competent learner. So I suppose it's a bit disappointing that you weren't aware of that. I don't know what if the Mayor's view is that providing ESOL to sort of new arrivals, whether they're asylum seekers or refugees or any other kind of arrival, is an important thing. I don't know why you've not sort of picked that up. It seemed to come across quite clearly.
Well, I mean, your question did open up by giving me the impression that it was the content that was at fault, which has never been raised with me.
Okay.
But obviously, we are acutely aware that there is a greater need than there is courses and money available, which I think speaks more to how you went on to describe what the problem was. So of that, we are aware.
Well, I mean, another part of it was about the joining up. So there was talk about the difficulty that there's sort of almost a siloed thinking in terms of here's the ESOL provision to provide them with the English that they need. Separately, maybe there's workplace training or professional skills or sort of re-provisioning. So if somebody has professional qualifications from elsewhere, they arrive here, there's then a need to obviously, let's say if you were, I mean, the example we had was a doctor who's currently sitting in the audience. One of her challenges was about getting from being a doctor in another country to being qualified here. and those different bits join up. So, you know, the professional language that you need to understand in English. So is that element of rethinking, is that something that's on your radar in terms of joining up the different types of training?
Not from the AEB perspective, but it might be from other work that's going on.
So I think this reveals some of those issues that I mentioned before in relation to that recognition issue, which could potentially help with making some of that easier for those who provide ESOL. I know some of the work that we've sought to do, both in conjunction with AEB, but also in the development of an ESOL coordinator role that sits within my team, is to try to ensure that we're bringing together as much as possible some of the needs that have been raised by individuals who are seeking to get onto ESOL courses, and also some of the requirements of those who are providing both formal and informal ESOL teaching and provision, so that we can bring those two together. And one of the things that we've sought to do with, there's a couple of programs that we run specifically for Hong Kongers, and that work has looked at trying to do some of that sector-specific training and sector-specific work, which ultimately I think is maybe perhaps getting at some of the issues that you're raising, which recognises that there are individuals who want to take sector-specific professional exams and want to take sector-specific professional courses, and just need some guidance and support in knowing how to do that. And so the programme links them up with those providers who are able to support them with that, in clear recognition that there will be individuals who were in Hong Kong who were doing specific types of training and want to get into professional roles whilst they're here. So we're seeking to do a lot of that with our Welcome programme, which is specifically set up for Hong Kongers. The funding for that is going to start again this year, and so we're always looking for ways to seek to improve and to make sure that we're really meeting the needs of those individuals. So that might be one of the things that one of the gaps that perhaps you're asking about.
Well, that wasn't the one I was asking about, but funnily enough, that was the one I was just about to ask about, which is about signposting and no wrong door. And that was another problem that came up, was that maybe there's some help out there that people can't find it, and eventually they blunder across it by accident, or, you know, it seems to be quite haphazard. So what is, I don't know if this is a question maybe for you, Jules, or whichever you feel most able to answer, but what is the Mayor doing in terms of that signposting role to make sure that people are finding what support there is, which may, just to reiterate, may be stuff the Mayor is doing or the public sector is doing, may also, as we heard this morning, be work that charities and other such groups are doing?
Yeah, I mean, No Wrong Doors, funded by the Mayor through UK, largely through UK SPF money, and that means it's funded until 24-25, and that does coordinate skills and employment services across London's boroughs, and it's about targeting support for groups who do face additional barriers to particularly accessing support, and particularly accessing ESOL. Coordinating referrals at a sub-regional level. So, and that's why it's run in combination with the sub-regions. And probably a good one to talk to would probably be Central London Forward, actually, who are particularly looking at the issue of Afghan and Ukrainian refugees. A particular focus on that.
I mean, I appreciate you're here, obviously, to explain to us why what the Mayor is doing is great, but the story that came across this morning was that, you know, whatever is happening isn't really working for a lot of people. So what's...
Well, they are relatively new, the constructs that have come forward under No Wrong Door. So,
when did No Wrong Door start? I apologise for calendar question. Do you know when No Wrong Door started?
It's been over the last year, but people, you know, it was commissioned, and people then have to put things in place, and obviously it's all the harder when, including with ESOL, when one's only got short-term funding. It's only now, just now for the first time, that we are aware that we have we haven't been told yet, but we will get 2 years notice of ESOL funding. So it gets very hard for people to gear up for delivery when they're only living on 1 year to the next, and taking on permanent employees and gearing up both systems and organisations.
So I infer from that then that the ESOL funding is really government funding, and the amount of funding that there is in London is dependent on the funding that comes from government. Is the Mayor sort of adding to that in any substantial way, or is it essentially just that money that's coming into the adult education budget from central government?
Yeah, it's AEB money.
So the Mayor's not adding extra to that?
Not for courses, no.
Okay. There was apologies to return to ESOL. There was a question about the ESOL Plus pilot, which was, I think, 2018 to 2021, which was a sort of pilot program looking to improve access. I just wondered if you had, you're nodding, Debbie. So what, how that went, what came out of it, and what future benefits it might provide.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, so ESOL Plus was a piece of work that we did in conjunction with Jules' team. It was trying to test innovative ways of overcoming some of those barriers to accessing ESOL and ultimately getting into work for refugees and those seeking asylum. So there were 3 projects: ESOL Plus Employers, ESOL Plus Arts, ESOL Plus Childcare. And they were principally around trying to ensure, so one of the biggest barriers to trying to access both work and training is childcare. 70% of the individuals who participated on the programme were women, and childcare was provided. I think the key things that we found from all 3 of the projects, and we were able to support 250 people in total, was that it's really important to try to do this cross-sectoral work with employers, with AEB providers, and with sector-specific organisations. So one of the pilots was specifically around trying to ensure that people have access to English language in the creative arts, so culture sector, heritage sector, arts, and what was really useful about that was that people were able to get free access to childcare. Was really beneficial, but also we were able to develop a couple of toolkits, and also to try to show other employers the possibilities of trying to offer childcare as well as provision, and remove some of those eligibility requirements that Jules was talking about, and that enabled the 250 to participate effectively. They enjoyed it, had a really good impact on women, and that's massively important because we know that the employment gap for refugee women is bigger than it is for refugee men. So making sure that they can gain access to to English language will hopefully and helpfully help them to get into work.
Just a practical question in terms of how that works. So if you did the ESOL with the childcare support, was that provision so you would go to the college or wherever it was happening, and there'll be like a creche or childminder or something like that happening at that site?
Well, finding whichever innovative way works. So yes, if it's on the site or if it's somewhere local, just making sure that that people are able to benefit from it. And they were all new. They were all testing new ways of trying to do this work, and it was really good at getting women to participate, which was a success.
That makes sense because that was a pilot. So testing out different ideas makes sense. So what were the conclusions and what's happening? What's the future of that work?
So we've developed a couple of toolkits. We've run a couple of sessions with funders and with providers, and ultimately it's about trying to show them what they could do should they want to emulate the work of these pilots, and hopefully they have taken on some of the benefits and I'm hopeful that there are more and more women who are participating in ESOL, participating in further education, and ultimately participating in work.
So the Mayor's not continuing to fund that. It's sort of the hope is that somebody else will.
Well, they were pilots, so ultimately it was to give others the opportunity to learn from and take them forward, yes.
Okay. And I think my final question, I think you touched a bit on this earlier. So, for example, Hong Kongers who've come here, there's a sort of support package that goes with those people, which differs from us, some other groups. What benefits have you seen? So what does that support package mean in practice, and what are the benefits that you've seen from that?
So we've run 2 projects which are specifically for those who come from Hong Kong on the BNO, so the British National Overseas Visa, and have chosen to settle in London. And some of the benefits have been principally around access to skills and also to work. So we've run employment skills workshops for those who have been participating in the programs. We've run an entrepreneurship sessions with a clear recognition that there are many people who want to set up their own businesses, and giving them tips on how to do that. But also what's been really important is that we've been able to support some of those civil society organisations who represent East and Southeast Asian communities, and those who represent and support Hong Kongers, and we've been able to support them to further support the Hong Kongers who they have been supporting quite effectively. We've also done a bit of work around mental health support. Obviously, one of the issues with regards to those who come to the UK and are displaced communities is the impact of trauma that they've experienced. And so together with Thrive London, we've run a number of courses to support those who are on the front line in supporting Hong Kongers and other refugees and those seeking asylum, so that they can have the confidence to provide them with mental health and well-being support as well.
Okay. Just focusing particularly on employment and sort of, employability, if you like, of those people. I don't know, do you have sort of evidence, data in terms of how the support that, not just Hong Kongers, but those groups that have the resettlement schemes, how the support that comes with those people from central government has made a difference one way or the other in terms of evidence, not just you've given us some sort of qualitative sort of storytelling example of what's happened, but is there evidence of higher employability?
Not at this stage. The programme started last year. It's been largely qualitative because people have been arriving throughout the entire period. So I don't have figures to share at the moment. The only things I guess I can say is that the programmes have been run so successfully that the groups who we have worked with are really keen for us to continue providing that support. And some of that support will be not long term, but for us to really reap the benefits of it's not something that we can talk to you about right now, but hopefully once the second year of the programme is up and running, we may have some data to share.
Okay, do you know when that's likely to be?
Applications are out at some point this year. I'm not sure when. I can let you know, but they will run for another year. So in 2024, we could give you some data.
Okay.
Hopefully.
That feels a long way off in January 2023, but okay. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. On that point of data and evidence, I'd be quite keen to see, you were talking about the Soul Plus pilots programme. I'd be quite keen to see the evidence or the proactive approach that you're doing to make sure that it is picked up. You were using the word hope, but I'd like to see a bit more of a proactive action, from the Mayor to make sure that this is something that can be picked up by other councils, groups, whatever it is that we're trying to reach out to.
Sure, yes. There was a dissemination programme, so the aim was ultimately to run the pilot and to give people the information that they need to take it on. I'm sure we can get in touch with people to see how successful they found it, and the programme itself ended in 2021, so we could always get back to some of them and see what has happened as a result of what they've learned.
If whatever you find out, if you can send that to us in writing, that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Assembly Member Polanski.
Thank you, Chair. Debbie, I'd like to ask you about London Strategic Migration Partnership, which I believe you chair. What's it doing to make things better for refugees and people seeking asylum, and what are its main achievements?
Yes, so I chair the LSNP, and it's a partnership between central government, local government, civil society, including migrant organisations and ourselves. It's I think one of the key successes, it's always difficult to talk about successes when there are individuals who are having terrible experiences, but one of the key successes has been the work that we've done with London councils around fair shares. We have a situation in the asylum and refugee system where there is a dispersal of individuals across the UK and across our city, which is inequitable and it's not sustainable. And one of the things that we've sought to do with London boroughs and with civil society organisations where possible is to ensure that this dispersal happens in a fairer way, in a way that doesn't leave too much pressure, as it were, on community resources within a local area, and indeed pressures on statutory services. And so together with London councils and with borough leads and with civil society organisations, we've developed a fair shares approach, which we've called the regional asylum policy, and it's effectively giving London the opportunity to better determine how those seeking asylum and refugees are distributed across the city. It's something that we have been developing over the past year, and we're really glad to see that we've been able to work really effectively with political leads across all spectrums, across the entire city, to try to get this into practice. And the fact that LSNP is a partnership which does include representation from the Home Office as well as DLUC and other key government departments does mean that we are delivering that type of work in conjunction with them, and making sure that they have got clear awareness of some of the pressures that clearly we have in London that we're seeking to try to resolve.
Thank you. This is putting you on the spot, but not it's not the intention, so it might be something you don't know a lot about, and that's fine. But Matthew Powell from Breaking Barriers, who was in the first panel, was banging the drum, in his words, about a refugee transition outcome fund. I don't know if this is something that the strategic partnership have looked at. It's going on in other cities.
No, I've not heard of it.
Fair enough, neither had I, so it was just seeing if you had. Something you will have heard of is the Asylum Welcome Project. In fact, you were just talking about it in reference to Hong Kongers. What is it achieved since the mayoral decision was approved in September 2021?
So the Asylum Welcome Project is something that we are running with a number of boroughs in London, which is it's a little bit like some of the pilots that I've mentioned before. It's where we are giving key team members within different boroughs the opportunity to test innovative ways of trying to tackle some of those barriers to integration for particular groups. So we started a project which I think we had our first meeting just last week to work with 11 boroughs distributed across both inner and outer London, so that they can identify solutions to the challenges that they face locally. Some of those will include volunteer pathways. So I've mentioned before that those who are seeking asylum cannot apply for work whilst their applications are being considered. But one of the things that is incredibly important to them to be able to do is to be able to volunteer and to gain the skills which are necessary to enable them to, if they have a positive decision on their on refugee status, to then be able to get into work. So different boroughs will come up with different solutions to the different locally derived challenges that they have in the support that they can provide to people seeking asylum and refugees. And that's a project that will be running for the next 18 months. And we're really looking forward to seeing some of the innovative ways that different boroughs will be taking to tackle the different local challenges that they have.
Yeah, it's really, really good to hear it's not a blanket approach, and obviously different communities have different needs. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Ahmed.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Deputy Mayors. Good afternoon, Deputy Mayors, even. Has the evaluation of the Asylum Welcome Programme been carried out yet? And if it has, what conclusions did it reach, and how has this fed into the Mayor's work on and the work of the London Strategic Migration Partnership?
So the Asylum Welcome Programme that I just described to Zach has only just started, so it hasn't yet had an evaluation. There are, however, things that we'll be looking for as a way of trying to see how successful they've been. So one of the things that we'll be keen to see is the extent to which they've been able to meet the challenges that they have set for themselves, but also whether they've been able to find resources within their boroughs, local resources that may be shared with voluntary sector and civil society organisations, and external resources to help them to overcome those challenges, because ultimately in trying to provide that support to individuals who will be in their boroughs seeking asylum, seeking support to integrate, be it access to ESOL, access to housing, access to school places. They will need to be able to rely on internal resources to be able to do so, and so we're keen to try to help them to be able to identify what those resources are, and where they can't identify those resources, help them to find other resources to help them to do that.
Have you got a timetable in mind as to when that first assessment will take place?
So programme will run for 18 months, so I guess it will be next year.
Thank you. What physical and mental health support is in place for refugees in London, given the well-known impact that poor health has on employment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So obviously there are a number of displaced communities in London, and we've worked very closely with Thrive London, who have been leading the sort of public mental health response to many of those groups. So they have run a series of sessions, as well as some training for frontline working in community-based organisations. And from the arrival of those from Afghanistan in 2021 to the situation facing those arriving from Ukraine over the past year, they've developed sessions that they've been able to deliver to around 650 individuals. And these sessions and the training has been trauma-informed, which is incredibly important. It's been culturally aware, so it's been specific to the particular groups that the sessions are being run to cater for. And it has been welcomed enormously by the community-based organisations who are supporting individuals with their mental health needs, with their well-being needs. We've also, and I've mentioned this before, with some of the Hong Kongers who we're supporting, this was something that was certainly raised directly with me by many of the Hong Kongers I met at the start of the programme, who were really clear that we had to ensure that mental health support was integral to any kind of response the Mayor is providing for both resettled communities but also those seeking asylum. And so with the Hong Kongers project, we've also included resources. So a lot of these resources are online, but again also training for frontline workers, and also giving them just the information that they need so that they know where they need to go if they have urgent mental health needs, so they know how to access those in the NHS and elsewhere. So it's a really good question. And it's really important because it's really clear that we have to try to make sure that mental health support is integral to any of the services that we are providing, be it through LSNP or elsewhere, to those who have arrived here seeking sanctuary, but also importantly for those who find themselves on the front line providing that support directly to them.
Thank you. So the mental health support that you've described specifically for, you talked about Afghan evacuees, Ukrainian refugees and Hong Kongers.
Yes.
Is that the support that's provided by Thrive London?
Yes.
Okay.
Not all of it. So Thrive London has definitely been providing the support to Afghan evacuees and Ukraine arrivals. The support for Hong Kongers we are doing in conjunction with Thrive, but then we're also working with other providers as well.
Is that support going to be widened out to other refugees, whether that's via Thrive London or any other organisation or outlet?
So this is a really good question. A lot of the support that we have provided has been to those resettled communities that you've mentioned. There are individuals who are part of the, who are not part of resettlement schemes, those who are seeking asylum, and those for whom the journey to becoming a refugee is a different journey. We're keen to try to do as much as we can to provide support to those individuals as well, because whilst there is a distinction that is made in the way in which individuals have arrived in London, we seek not to make those distinctions. So I've mentioned some of the work that Thrive London is doing specifically with resettled communities, but we're also keen to try to work with Thrive London to provide support to those organisations who are also providing support just to those who are seeking asylum and refugees who sit outside of those groups. And that fits within the Mayor's broader approach, which is to not have that distinction in the provision that we are providing to individuals who fall in the refugee and asylum seeking population.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask one additional question to Jules. There was a lot of discussion in the earlier part of our session about adult education and the need for a bespoke approach. What's your opinion on that, and what more could we be doing in making sure there is more of a bespoke approach when it comes to training refugees and asylum seekers?
Well, I'd be interested to hear the outcome of your questioning earlier today and hear what that request was for. I'm particularly interested in the comments about ESOL. I mean, clearly the ESOL provision is tiered. I don't know, because it certainly would fall outside of the AEB to fund it, what language services are available for professionals, for example. So doctors, lawyers, and so on, who already have the levels of English that make entry 1, 2, 3 levels of ESOL not appropriate. But it would certainly fall out of further education, I think, to be able to supply that technical English of that level. But it's certainly something worth exploring. But I think it would fall outside of, say, FE.
I mean, obviously, you're definitely going to be hearing what the discussion was, but I think what we're really, really keen to see, and particularly from what we've learnt this morning, is an approach that we have on adult education and training to be from day one when asylum seekers and refugees, arrive here. That's the key. Is that something that you could look into and perhaps make an assessment of in terms of
its availability and their ability to access it? Well, the Mayor has removed barriers to the wait. As I said previously, there were sort of 3-year waits that applied, and those barriers have been removed. The timing barriers that do exist now would be about sort of breakdowns in signposting and coordination, and that's what we're hoping to address through some of the things we've spoken about today, not least the no wrong door approach.
Okay. Thank you.
Good afternoon to our guests. Just to pick up the conversation, Jules, just to help you out slightly, I think one of the issues we were grappling with this morning is the different levels that refugees would access training with, and I think your comment about some of it being outside of your purview is probably correct. But just from I'm asking you a question now to see if it's even possible. I'm not trying to be tricky, but one of the issues that came up this morning was, in order to learn English to a high technical level to move on, would it be possible to provide some kind of shadowing? The example we were given is of a refugee who had doctoral qualifications, and doing ESOL wouldn't teach you the sort of vernacular that a doctor uses. Being around doctors is what you would need. And I'm really asking the question, is something like that even possible for the mayor to provide? Or would you need to go away and think about that, that kind of thing?
I'd have to go away and explore it, because I'm not, off the top of my head, I can't think of the coordination that would on which we would have the levers. So, for example, doctors would be a really good example. They'd be very welcome, but they'd be welcome in any country, even the country from their origin. But they would also be welcome here to work as doctors. Clearly, the NHS then would be the people best placed to coordinate that and organise it. There would be certain points where, yes, coordination to be able to signpost that. So I think it's probably a partnership of a lot of actors, and things would have to be in place. But the actual delivery of what you're talking about, I think, would have to be with the sectors themselves.
Yeah, I think that's correct, and I understand that, because clearly City Hall is not able to help people be doctors. I think the other thing this leads me to, another question is, it sometimes sounds to me like you believe, and this is not a challenge, that the no wrong door almost functions like a one-stop shop. Because the other thing we heard this morning is, as a refugee, things are confusing. They don't know the British system. They're sent from pillar to post. And if the mayor has any power, it's the power to convene. So my last question, it would be a case of the mayor saying, here's what refugees need. This is the kind of support sectors could give. Look at this. With this one-stop shop, do you feel like the mayor is providing that, or anything you have planned is to do that, or is that a responsibility for somebody else?
I think it is the responsibility of the one-stop shops. I mean, they're as I said, it's the mayor, the boroughs, DWP as a partnership, and the ambition is to, what it says on the tin, no wrong door. So they're not necessarily supplying all services themselves, but knowing where people can find them. I mean, I myself have witnessed Afghan refugees with the mayor at a session at one of the integration hubs in East London, and hearing all the different questions that the class had for the various hub staff, people from DWP, experts in various in negotiating the world of how to find benefits, how to negotiate the various systems you have to negotiate as coming in. And I do remember actually one of the questions someone asking about, I was a journalist in my country, how can I get into journalism here? And I remember the confidence with which the respondent had in saying that, well, look, we're not going to necessarily get you into, get you into the Times or the Telegraph or something tomorrow, but come and talk to us and how we can use how you could use your skills in an appropriate way. So there is ambition, there is a level of confidence about this. Is it perfect? No, I'm sure there's always more that can be done, and they would be happy to learn, always happy to learn as to what more they could do and get feedback as if people feel the signposting wasn't all that it could be.
Okay, my last question is, it's all based around this, how does someone access the information? So the term that was used this morning was looped in. So when someone does receive their status, because again there's several different routes and different levels that we've discussed this morning, is there somehow that all of the agencies involved could be alerted to that? Because the problem for refugees that you're pinging left and right, and you go to a place, you have to start all over again. There's a frustration, there's a time wasting period there, and time wasted tends to be money wasted. Is there something that could be done to just loop everybody in who could then work with that refugee. Certainly the charity we had this morning, that's a function they tend to perform because they're plugged in and they say, actually, you need this help. And the other piece I'm going to give to you is much of this is the same sort of need and help that any poorer person would need. I sat there this morning, it just felt like youth work. I used to work with young people, and what they wanted really was career planning, which door to knock on next to achieve the next level. Do you feel like that's being given, and is anybody just putting them into our normal services? Is that possible? You as well, Debbie, sorry.
Well, I mean, the integration hubs are, there are no wrong door operations are open to all.
Mm-hmm.
And as I've said, some are particularly focused on, particularly the central London one, focused on the integration of migrant groups and giving help in that way. But all of them across all the hubs across London should have that capacity. And would look to draw on specialist help, would look to be working with all the different actors, because the idea isn't that there is one place in an area that is meant to do everything. It is meant to be a network. So whatever door you knock on, so if you were just to go to the local council, then they should be able to, if they can't give you the answer, then they would send you to a hub which would have more signposting capacity.
Okay. I get that that's the intention. I just feel maybe a little bit of work needs to be done on the impact. I respect the intention. The intention's correct. But listening this morning, it sounded like everybody else knows what's going on except the people who need the help. And I think that needs to be ported down a bit. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, you make some good points there. I think Debbie wanted to just come in. Yeah.
Just very briefly, to sort of build on Jules' point, I think it's a good point that's well made. We do have, the Mayor does use his role as a convener through, there's a lot of digital support, and I do recognise that digital support is not for everyone. We do have a Migrant Londoners Hub, which we launched last year, which doesn't do a lot of that signposting. I recognise, though, in my saying that you do have to have a level of digital skill to be able to use it, and English, obviously. But it's principally set up so that those, not just those who've got the immigration needs, but the individuals who are representing them, so like their caseworkers, and some of those charitable organisations, perhaps, I don't know, the ones who were here this morning, who can access the information on their behalf and can use that to do the signposting for them. But that hopefully, well, that in conjunction with the integration hubs can work together to try to provide some of that information. I think it's a point that's well made, though, because there is an awful lot of confusion as to where to go next in order to get that information. We're hoping that the sort of the digital offer alongside the face-to-face offer can work in conjunction to try to provide that support for people.
I think there's some advocacy in that, because if the professionals, because one group of people you can guarantee could use the digital, the professionals, and if they can get information, then the signposting can become more effective.
And what Debbie was just saying about not everyone coping with digital has prompted me to think of the community outreach programme as well that we're running to do with the AEB, up to £9,000 for a group to interact directly with their own communities. And we are already funding a project to link Ukrainians to the AEB, and there is a current one that is expanding specifically to target Afghan refugees as well.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. I found that really interesting, and specifically, I'm quite keen to make sure that we are aware of the fact that there is this two-tier approach that I was mentioning earlier, and those people who are missing out. At the start of the morning, it was very clear that there's still a lot of data that we don't have, and a lot of people who we're not aware of, who are refugees who can't find access to work, and I think if there's anything that we can do from today's discussion, is to highlight that there is a problem still, that this system isn't perfect, and that we've got a lot more to do. So thank you so much for coming this morning and this afternoon. Let's add that bit in there, and answering all our questions. I'm going to do that bit again. I'm afraid, because there was a blue bit of ink that was missing from my notes. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Excellent. Can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree the output arising from the discussion?
Agreed.
Excellent. And can I ask the committee to note the work programme for the 2022-23 Assembly year?
Agreed.
Excellent. And the next meeting of the Economy Committee is scheduled for the 22nd of February 2023 at 2 o'clock in the Chamber at City Hall. I have no urgent business, which concludes today's meeting. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.